In Melbourne, scientists grew something no processor has been alive. 800,000 living neurons wired directly into silicon, thinking, adapting, learning. This is Cortical Labs CL1, the first commercial biological computer. It taught itself to play Pong, then Doom, using a fraction of the power. Because silicon is hitting a wall and AI keeps slamming into it harder, so scientists stopped fighting biology and started building with it. Hit subscribe because the next computers might be alive and learning. "60 years ago, an engineer noticed something simple. Computing power kept doubling every 2 years. That pattern, Moore's law, built the entire digital world we live in today. But transistors are now just a few dozen atoms wide, smaller than most viruses. At that scale, electrons stop behaving like particles and start leaking through solid barriers. Scientists call it quantum tunneling, current escaping even when a chip is switched off. In early 2026, TSMC began mass-producing 2-nanometer chips using an entirely new transistor shape. To fight the leakage, engineers redesigned the transistor into a stacked shape called gate-all-around. It wraps the gate completely around the channel, giving far tighter control over electrons. The next node is already planned for 2028, but it will need entirely new exotic materials to work. Each new generation now costs exponentially more to design and yields fewer working chips. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence is consuming power faster than any technology in history. Training a single large AI model can burn through as much electricity as thousands of homes. Every chip also faces a second problem. Memory and processing live in separate places. Data has to shuttle back and forth between them, burning energy with every trip. Engineers call this the von Neumann bottleneck, and it has never been fully solved. The human brain doesn't have this problem. It stores and computes in the very same cells, and it does this running on roughly 20 watts, less power than a light bulb. The gap between a brain's efficiency and a chip's became too large to ignore. Some forecasts suggest AI data centers could double their global electricity use within a few years. So a small group of scientists stopped simulating neurons and started growing real ones instead. Inside the CL1, neurons sit on a grid called a multi-electrode array, thousands of contact points. Each electrode can send a tiny signal to a neuron or listen for the signal a neuron sends back. Researchers call this a closed loop. The neurons act and a system responds instantly. The training method comes from a theory called the free energy principle. Developed by neuroscientist Carl Friston, it argues intelligent systems act to minimize surprise. So Cortical Labs built a simple rule: get it right and feedback stays predictable. Get it wrong and the neurons are hit with chaotic, unpredictable electrical noise. Neurons hate unpredictability. To avoid it, they physically reorganize their own connections. That reorganization is called synaptic plasticity, the same process behind human memory. In lab tests, measurable learning appeared within about 5 minutes of gameplay. No code was written for this, no algorithm was trained, the neurons adapted on their own. Even more surprising, researchers found these living networks sometimes needed far fewer examples to learn than deep learning software. Keeping the neurons alive takes real biology: nutrient fluid, precise temperature, constant filtration. Under these conditions, CL1's neurons have survived for 6 months, some pushing toward a year. That's long enough for real scientific work, testing drugs, modeling disease, watching neurons respond in real time. Unlike CL1's mouse-only prototype, the commercial version uses neurons derived from both human and mouse tissue. Researchers access it remotely too, over the cloud, deploying code the same way they would for any server.
Carl Friston himself has called CL1 the culmination of decades of theory finally becoming physical.
Meet Dr. Brett Kagan, the scientist who first taught neurons in a dish to play Pong. In 2022, his team published a paper with a bold title, Neurons that Exhibit Sentience. That single word ignited a firestorm across the neuroscience community. Other researchers pushed back hard, calling the sentience claim scientifically unfounded. A rebuttal published in the journal Neuron argued the results were too weak to support it. They warned that overselling neurons like this could confuse the public about what's actually alive and aware. Kagan didn't dismiss the criticism. He said the pushback was fair and necessary. He revealed something most people didn't know. Cortical Lab's very first published paper wasn't about Pong at all. It was an ethics paper, written before the technology even had commercial ambitions. Since then, his team has kept working with independent bioethicists and philosophers year after year. Kagan is now careful with his language. The neurons aren't proven conscious, but he refuses to dismiss the question either, because certainty here doesn't exist yet. That tension between groundbreaking results and genuine uncertainty became the foundation for CL1's entire design. Every CL1 sold today ships with an ethics framework built directly into how it's used. It's a strange position for a scientist, building the technology and questioning it at the same time. But for Kagan, that's exactly the point. Real progress requires staying honest about what we don't know. A single CL1 unit costs $35,000 to buy outright. For labs that can't afford that, Cortical Labs also offers cloud access remotely. A rival Swiss company, Final Spark, takes a different approach entirely. Their Neuro platform lets researchers rent access to living brain organoids for a few $100s a month. Final Spark claims its organoids can be up to 100,000 times more energy efficient than digital chips. To put that in perspective, training one large language model like GPT-3 used about 10 gigawatt hours. That's roughly 6,000 times more electricity than the average European uses in an entire year. Biological computing is no longer a single company's experiment. Dozens of universities and research institutions have already signed on to test these platforms. At Indiana University, a similar system called BrainAware learned basic voice recognition. It was trained on just 240 audio clips from different speakers. That's a fraction of what a conventional voice recognition model typically requires. But biology has its limits too. Final Spark's organoids currently survive only around 100 days. CL1's neurons, by comparison, have been kept alive for 6 months and counting. Longer lifespans mean longer experiments, and that's driving real commercial interest in Cortical Labs specifically. Still, none of these systems can yet handle the everyday computing your phone or laptop does. They're built for narrow, specific tasks, not for replacing general-purpose computers. For now, biocomputing's real value lives in research labs, not living rooms. Even skeptics admit the efficiency numbers are hard to dismiss outright. A gigawatt hour of electricity could power roughly 100,000 homes for an hour. Yet a living neuron culture can process meaningful signals on a few watts of power. That difference in scale is exactly why investors have started paying very close attention. As biocomputers move from labs to commercial products, a much bigger question follows them. Right now, these machines exist almost entirely outside any formal regulatory system. There's no dedicated framework for biocomputers built from living human neural tissue. In March 2026, scientists writing in the journal Science called for urgent global oversight. They warned that current rules, designed for medical research, weren't built for hardware made of neurons. Researchers writing in Frontiers in Science have proposed something called an ethics in parallel approach. The idea? Build ethical oversight into the technology from day one, not bolted on after the fact.
Funders have taken notice of that gap too. Both the National Science Foundation and DARPA have poured millions into this research, which means government money is now backing a technology with no dedicated rulebook. Even funding agencies now require ethics review boards before biocomputing grants are approved. Biocomputing also breaks from older stem cell debates in one important way. It moves human neural tissue completely outside biomedical use, into commercial hardware. November 2025 saw researchers gather at the Asilomar Conference Center to confront exactly that. The meeting brought together scientists, bioethicists, and legal experts in one room. A central question: how would anyone even know if a cluster of neurons became conscious? There's still no agreed scientific definition of consciousness at all, not for humans and not for organoids. One theory, called integrated information theory, suggests consciousness could emerge from complex, interconnected signal patterns. If that theory is right, some biocomputers might already be closer to that threshold than anyone's comfortable admitting. Bioethicists warn that if a biocomputer is ever proven conscious, it would carry what's called moral status. That status would place real limits on what research could ethically be done to it. Interestingly, the very researchers who coined the term organoid intelligence in 2023 are now among the most cautious voices. They've publicly worried that inflated marketing claims from biocomputing companies could trigger a serious public backlash. A quieter concern also exists: donor consent. Some of the human cells used in these systems came from donors never told their tissue might power a computer. Public opinion research published this year found something telling. Support for biocomputing rises sharply when a system shows real awareness of other systems around it. In other words, the more alive something seems, the more people want it treated carefully. None of this has slowed commercialization down. Cortical Labs, Final Spark, and others keep shipping new systems, but nearly every serious voice in the field agrees on one thing: the ethics can't trail behind the engineering. One framework, whenever it arrives, will likely shape not just biocomputing, but the next era of AI regulation broadly. Whatever comes next, it won't just be a story about better computers.
The chip age isn't over. It just found a competitor that's alive. For 60 years, computing meant electricity moving through metal and silicon. Now, for the first time, it can also mean electricity moving through living cells. Whether that becomes the next great leap or a passing experiment is still being written. Melbourne's lab-grown neurons were just the first proof that computing didn't need to stay purely artificial or purely digital. One thing is certain: the line between mind and machine just got a lot harder to draw. Hit like, share this with someone, and subscribe to SynthCosmos. We cover the science reshaping our world as we know it every single week. We'll see you in the next one.